My name is Nora Callahan. I was 31 years old when my parents put a price on me. $450,000. The buyer was a man I had never met, sitting in a wheelchair at the end of a gravel driveway in Converse County, Wyoming. My mother handed me a pen and called it a second chance. I called the man I had loved for 3 years and ended everything in under 4 minutes. That was supposed to be the worst day of my life. It was not even close, because 1 year later, in a room full of people who believed they had gotten away with it, I opened a folder. My parents, my husband's brother, their attorney. Every person at that table went quiet in a way I had never heard a room go quiet before. Here is what none of them knew when they sat down. I need to tell you who I am before I tell you what they did. I grew up in Gillette, Wyoming, the kind of town where the coal mines define everything. The air, the economy, the way men measure their worth. My parents, Ruth and Earl Callahan, ran the kind of household that looked functional from the outside and felt like standing on a fault line from the inside. Earl worked the mines for 19 years until his back gave out. Ruth cleaned houses and managed the debt the way some people manage a second career. Constantly, quietly, and with a skill set that should have gone toward something better. I got out at 17 on a partial scholarship to the University of Wyoming. I added 3 part-time jobs and finished my geology degree in 4 years, then a master's in geochemistry, funded by fellowships and field work, and more nights than I can count, falling asleep at my desk with a formation report under my cheek. By 30, I was a senior field geologist for a mineral survey firm based in Casper. Quiet work, precise, the kind of career where the data either holds or it does not. And nobody applauds you either way. But the ground does not lie. Thomas Breck found me at a conference in Laramie. He was a structural engineer, patient eyes, a laugh that arrived slowly and stayed. We dated for 3 years. He proposed on a Wednesday evening on the banks of the North Platte with a ring he had saved for 8 months. I said yes before he could finish the sentence. The phone rang the next morning. My mother's voice had not changed in 13 years. Same cadence. Same way of starting a sentence, like she was resuming a conversation I had never agreed to have. "We are in trouble, Nora. Real trouble." I asked how much. She said it was not about money. It was about family. "There is a way out for all of us." I told her no twice. The third time she went quiet. Then she used the line she always used. "After everything we gave up for you." I sat on the edge of my bed with Thomas's ring still on my finger and waited for what came next. With Ruth Callahan, there was always something next. They arrived 3 days later. No call. Just 2 people in a borrowed car standing at my apartment door in Casper, like the visit had always been planned. Earl looked smaller than I remembered. Ruth looked exactly the same. Pressed collar, careful lipstick, eyes that moved through a room like she was pricing everything in it. "Sit down, sweetheart. We have something to show you." She opened a leather portfolio on my kitchen table. Inside, photographs of a property, a hand-drawn map, a typed letter from an attorney I had never heard of. "The Whitfield family," she explained, "lived outside a town called Douglas in Converse County. They had a son, Cole, 34, paraplegic. A tunnel collapse at a coal survey site 3 years ago had fractured 2 vertebrae and severed his spinal cord at the waist. His family was offering $450,000 to a woman willing to marry him." I looked at her. "They want a wife, someone capable." "You are capable, Nora." Earl studied the window. Ruth pressed her palm flat on the folder, the way people press on things they want to stop moving. "He cannot do better than you. That is the point." I asked her to leave. She did not move. "We owe $140,000. The house is gone in 60 days. Your father's back. Another surgery. The deductible alone." She pressed the folder harder. "This money fixes everything. It does not fix me." She blinked. Once. Then she folded her hands and smiled the smile I had known since I was 8 years old. The one that came just before she said something she had been practicing. "Honey, you have been fixing yourself your whole life. Let us catch up." I did not sleep that week. I turned the ring on my finger until the skin went raw underneath. And I kept arriving at the same place. If I said no, they would lose the house. If I said yes, I would lose something I could not name but had spent 13 years building. I already knew which one I would choose. I drove to Thomas's apartment on a Thursday. He opened the door, smiling. Coffee in one hand, a book balanced on the counter behind him. A normal evening for a man who did not know what was walking toward him. "Hey, You hungry? I sat on the arm of his couch and pulled the ring off my finger. Set it on the coffee table between us. Neither of us looked away from it. Thomas, I cannot marry you. He put the coffee down, sat across from me, hands on his knees. He did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He just watched me the way he always watched me. Like he was waiting for the part that made sense. Is there someone else? No. Then what? Everything. And nothing I could explain without unraveling 13 years of keeping my family at a distance while still feeling their hands on my collar. He held the ring for a long time after I left. I know because he told me later. 4 months later, in a parking lot, in 6 sentences I will get to. But that night I drove home with the heater off and the Wyoming winter pressing against the glass like it was trying to get through. I let it. The ceremony was set for February. 6 weeks from the night I gave back the ring. Ruth managed the preparations the way she managed everything, with the precision of someone who cannot afford mistakes and the detachment of someone who has stopped feeling them. Dress ordered online, $69. No alterations, venue, the Whitfield property, guest list, immediate family only. She printed a schedule and taped it to the motel mirror the night before. Hair at 7, photos at 8:30, ceremony at 10. I watched her press my dress on the motel bed. Steam curled off the fabric. She smoothed every crease with the focus of someone finishing a contract. You are doing the right thing, Nora. You keep saying that because you keep needing to hear it. She hung the dress on the bathroom door and turned to me with the expression I recognized from childhood. The one that arrived just before she said something she had been composing. You were always going to pay us back. I let the sentence sit, did not fight it, did not flinch, because some sentences are not arguments. They are confessions. And Ruth had just told me exactly what I had always been to her. Not a daughter, a deferred account. Earl sat in the car the entire morning. I saw him through the window, hands on the steering wheel, engine off, staring at the dashboard. He did not come in. He never came in. He was the kind of man who stood in a current and let it take him where it wanted. I had spent years being angry at him for it. Now I just felt the weight of it. What I did not know yet, Ruth had already spent $62,000 of the $450. A credit line she had hidden from Earl. A payment on a storage unit full of things bought during a bad stretch the previous winter. The money was already bleeding before the ink dried. I packed my bag. At the bottom, under everything else, I placed my field kit, hand lens, sample bags, GPS unit, old habit, the tools of a life I was not certain I would get to keep. The Whitfield property sat on 180 acres of flat, high desert land that looked like it had been deciding for years whether to give up. Pale grass, a rusted grain silo, a farmhouse that had been white once and was now the color of old bone. Cole was at the end of the driveway, dark jacket, clean shirt, hands folded in his lap, and in his right palm, a brass compass, small, tarnished, the kind that field surveyors carried 50 years ago. His wheelchair sat on a plywood ramp that had been built recently. The wood was still raw. The ceremony lasted 9 minutes. A county clerk, no music. Earl shook Cole's hand without meeting his eyes. Ruth smiled for a photograph nobody had asked her to take. When the families moved toward the house, Cole stayed on the porch. I stood beside him because I did not know where else to stand. He looked at the fields, then at me. You do not have to stand there. I do not know where I am supposed to stand. He almost smiled. Almost. Nobody asked you either, did they? 5 words. And in those 5 words, every assumption I had carried into this driveway cracked. This man was not passive. He was not confused about what had happened. He saw it completely. I looked at the compass in his palm. My grandfather's, he said. He surveyed this whole county when nobody thought it mattered. Said there was more in this ground than anyone was looking for. I did not know what that meant yet. But the way he held that compass, loose and familiar, like it was part of his hand, stayed with me long after we went inside. Warren Whitfield was 43, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who arrived in a room before he entered it, his voice filling the space while he was still in the hallway. He arrived at the property the evening of the wedding with a handshake that lasted too long and a way of speaking that made every sentence sound like a decision already made. Welcome to the family, Nora. You need anything? You come to me, not to Cole, to him. Within the first week, I understood the structure of the Whitfield household. Warren controlled the finances. Warren managed what he called the family trust, the legal entity that held the land, the equipment, The accounts. Warren made the calls and signed the papers and spoke about Cole in the third person, even when Cole was 3 feet away. He tires in the afternoon. Do not let him overdo it. He needs the West Room. The window helps with his mood. Cole does not get a vote. That last one came on a Tuesday at the kitchen table over county tax records Cole had asked to see. Warren did not look up when he said it. Just flat, like stating weather. Cole's hands tightened on his armrests. His jaw set once. Then he released it, said nothing. I washed dishes that evening and thought about a word I had not used since graduate school. Overburden, in geology. It is the material sitting on top of something worth finding. You have to move it before you can read what is underneath. Warren talked about the land constantly. The trust holds it. The trust manages it. The trust, meaning Warren, will decide what happens to it. But nobody had told me what the land was actually worth. And nobody had explained why Warren was suddenly so interested in keeping Cole away from the paperwork. The first year moved in seasons. Spring. Cole and I lived in parallel. Separate rooms. Polite mornings. He read in the study. His grandfather's room still stacked with rolled maps and geology texts I recognized from my own shelves at Casper. I drove 45 minutes each way to the survey office in Douglas and came home to a quiet house. Summer. I found him in the workshop one afternoon. Tools across his lap, rewiring the hydraulic lift on the back of the hay trailer. His hands moved with a precision that did not match the story Warren told about him. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before he noticed me. The motor coupling was stripped. Warren was going to pay a contractor $300 to replace it. How did you learn to do that? He set the wrench down. I have a degree in mining engineering and 4 years of field work before the accident. I spent 6 months after doing occupational therapy until I could manage most things myself. The chair did not take my hands. He said it without bitterness. Just fact, Anna, the home health aide who came Mondays and Wednesdays, told me the rest. Cole had worked for a subsurface survey company before the accident. Specialized in coal and mineral formation mapping. His grandfather had done similar work decades earlier, self-taught. Before the family shifted to agricultural leasing, he is the most technically capable person on this property, Anna said one afternoon folding laundry. Warren just does not benefit from anyone knowing that. Fall. We started eating dinner together. Not by arrangement, just proximity becoming habit. He talked about formation depths. I talked about core sample analysis. 2 people who had spent their careers reading what was underground. Discovering they were speaking the same language. Winter. He made me laugh. A real one, the startled kind that comes before you, can decide whether to let it. I had married a man 2 families called helpless. He was the only person in either family who had never asked anything of me. And by the end of that first year, I was beginning to understand that the ground beneath this property held something nobody had been looking for, except one man. A long time ago, Cole's grandfather had died 4 years before the accident. Heart failure in the field, boots still laced. The family buried him on a Friday and began arguing about the land by Monday. The study had been his, an oak drafting table, a shelf of rolled survey maps in canvas tubes, 3 rows of geology texts I recognized. Field notebooks stacked by year going back to the 1970s. Your grandfather was a geologist. Cole wheeled in behind me one afternoon when he found me in the doorway. Self-taught, he said. Spent 30 years mapping formations nobody commissioned. Grandfather thought there was something in this ground that the Cole surveys missed. Warren thought it was a hobby. I pulled a canvas tube from the shelf and unrolled it on the drafting table. Hand-drawn cross-sections, careful line work, formation labels in block print. This man had known exactly what he was doing. He was trained by the land itself. Cole positioned himself beside the table. He believed there was a layer here, persistent, that nobody had identified. Spent the last decade of his life sampling and documenting it. Did he find it? He thought so. Nobody listened. I studied the cross-section. The sequence was consistent with the regional stratigraphic column I worked with daily. Cretaceous shales, tertiary deposits, the standard plain sequence. But one layer had been traced in pencil, traced repeatedly, annotated in letters too small to read from where I stood. A gray band, thin, persistent, marked at intervals across the entire section. What did he call it? Cole picked up the map. The gray seam. That is all he ever wrote. I stared at the pencil line running across the formation. Something in the part of my brain trained to be patient stirred. I rolled the map back carefully, set it in its tube. That evening at dinner I said almost nothing, but I was already thinking about overburden and what tends to be underneath it. On a Sunday afternoon in March, Cole told me about the tunnel collapse. We were on the porch. He had the brass compass open in his palm, the needle trembling north. Same compass I had seen at the wedding. Survey work in Sheridan County, he said. A retaining wall gave out 12 feet above the access shaft. 2 vertebrae. Clean fracture. They airlifted me to Casper. Warren flew out the next morning. Not to sit with me. To call the insurance company. He told me the rest in pieces. The way people tell things they have carried alone for too long. After the accident, Warren stepped in, restructured the family trust to centralize control, filed paperwork giving himself signatory authority over the land, the equipment, the accounts. He told the family Cole could not manage his own affairs. Cole's voice stayed level, said the injury had affected my cognition. It had not, but by the time I could demonstrate that clearly, everything was already under Warren's name. And the marriage? Warren's arrangement. Find a wife. Make it appear that Cole is settled and cared for. Then he is free to manage the trust without interference. Nobody asks questions about a man who has a wife looking after him. Cole closed the compass, opened it again. Nobody asked you either, did they? Same 5 words, but this time not an observation, a recognition. 2 people who had been placed in the same arrangement by separate families for separate reasons. I looked at the compass in his hand. My grandfather used to say the most important things in the ground are the ones nobody has thought to look for yet. He held it out. Take this for a while. I think you will need it before I do. I took it. The brass was warm from his palm. The call came on a Thursday. I answered because Cole was outside and the phone was on the kitchen counter. A man named Ray Sutton calling from a minerals acquisition firm in Denver. I am looking for the owner of the Whitfield parcel in Converse County, Section 9. We would like to discuss a preliminary assessment. Assessment of what? Subsurface mineral potential. We have been reviewing regional geological data, and your section falls within our area of interest. I wrote down his name and number, hung up, stood at the counter for a long time. That evening I told Cole. He set down his book. Warren received a call like that 3 weeks ago. I heard him on the back porch. He told the man to call back after the paperwork was finalized. What paperwork? The trust consolidation. The document he keeps asking me to sign. I sat down across from him. Cole. He has never cared about this land. No, he didn't. Something changed. Something is underneath it. He said it the way people who grew up around surveyors say things about the ground. Not a guess, a recognition. I thought about the pencil line on his grandfather's cross-section. The gray seam, the minerals firm calling from Denver, the way Warren had started arriving unannounced with documents and a pen. We need to look at your grandfather's files. Cole nodded. There is a box in the study. Cedar, top shelf. I have not opened it since he died. That night I stared at the ceiling and thought about overburden. Tomorrow I would start moving it. The box was 16 inches long and heavy enough to require both hands. Cole watched from the doorway of the study. The room smelled like old paper and cedar and the particular stillness of a space that had been kept rather than lived in. I set it on the drafting table and opened the brass latch. Inside, a rolled survey map, a leather field notebook, a manila envelope, and a glass jar, the size of a mason jar, filled with gray clay. The clay was dense and fine-grained, the color of wet ash. A strip of masking tape across the lid read in careful block letters. Section 9, gray seam, 38 FT depth. HW, 1997. I unscrewed the lid, took a small amount between my fingers, rubbed it. My breath stopped. I had spent 9 years reading sediment. I had mapped clay formations across 4 Wyoming counties. I knew the texture of bentonite, the chalky feel of kaolin, the gritty density of ordinary alluvial clay. This was none of those. This was lighter than it should have been, smoother, with a faint quality I had only encountered in one type of formation. A lithium-bearing claystone that 3 separate research papers had flagged in the past 5 years as a frontier target for domestic mineral exploration. My hands were not steady. Cole. He wheeled closer. Your grandfather pulled this sample from 38 feet. That is what it says. I set the jar down and reached for the manila envelope. Inside were 2 documents. The first was a detailed cross-section of Section 9, more precise than any of the wall maps. The second was a single sheet of legal paper, a deed, yellowed, typed, and across the top, in language I had not seen outside of a property law course. Mineral estate, separate conveyance. I read it twice, then a third time. Then I looked at Cole. This says your grandfather left you the mineral rights personally, not the trust. Cole was very still. The clock on the mantel ticked. The cedar box sat open between us, and the gray clay in that jar, that unremarkable lump of earth in a mason jar with masking tape and block letters, suddenly weighed more than the entire 180 acres above it. I drove to the survey office before dawn, signed in, pulled the regional stratigraphic files for the Converse County quadrangle, cross-referenced the formation depths in Cole's grandfather's notebook against the state geological column. The gray seam appeared, not by name. Nobody had named it. But the depth, the interval, the position within the tertiary sequence, all matched a unit that 2 recent USGS papers had identified as a potential lithium-bearing claystone horizon, a formation that extended across portions of the northern plains but had never been commercially tested in this section. I read both papers at my desk, with coffee going cold beside me. Lithium concentrations reported in analogous formations ranged from 600 to 1,100 parts per million. The threshold for economic extraction, according to the most current DOE assessment, was 400. I spent a decade training myself not to jump, to wait for numbers, to let the data confirm before the excitement does. But sitting at that desk with a field notebook from 1997, a jar of gray clay, and a grandfather's pencil lines on a hand-drawn map, I could feel the data converging. This was not a guess. This was a formation. Persistent. Mappable. Potentially worth more than every lease agreement either family had ever signed. I packed the notebook carefully into my bag, drove home with both hands on the wheel and my pulse somewhere in my throat. I had spent my entire career reading ground that other people walked past. Cole's grandfather had done the same thing alone for 30 years, and nobody had listened. The difference now was that someone who knew how to listen was finally holding his work. Cole was on the porch when I got home. The brass compass sat on the armrest of his chair, catching the low afternoon light. I placed the gray clay jar on the table between us. I need to send this to a lab. He turned the jar in his hands. He had 4 years of fieldwork before the accident. He knew what a sediment sample meant. Lithium. I nodded. His grandfather had said this dirt would matter. Warren had called it an old man's hobby. It was not a hobby, Cole. He mapped a real formation, consistent and persistent at depth. And if the assay comes back the way I think it will, this land is not worthless. It is the opposite of worthless. He set the jar down. The gray clay sat under the afternoon light like something unremarkable. A jar of earth, the kind of thing you would discard without thinking during a kitchen clean-out. Warren is trying to get me to sign the mineral rights into the trust. I know, if I sign, everything transfers to the entity he controls. That is why he is in a hurry. Cole was quiet for a long time. The wind moved across the field. The grain silo creaked in the distance. We verify first, he said. No one knows until the lab confirms. Agreed. I packed the sample that night, double-bagged, labeled with coordinates and depth. Addressed to Dr. Miriam Holt at the University of Wyoming Geochemistry Lab. A colleague I trusted who would not ask questions before the numbers gave her a reason. The jar left the house in a padded envelope. What came back 3 weeks later would change every assumption both families had made about the dirt beneath their feet. I ran into Thomas at a lumber yard in Douglas. Late April. I was buying wood screws for a fence repair. He was in the hardware aisle holding a level like he had forgotten what he came for. Nora. Hi, Thomas. We stood for a moment. 2 people who used to share an apartment now sharing a fluorescent-lit aisle at a building supply store. He looked the same. Same patient eyes. Same way of standing with one hand in his pocket like he was always halfway to settled. He had let his hair grow a little longer. How are you? I am okay. Are you? He held the level a little tighter. I thought about the question, not the reflexive answer. The real one. A year ago, I would have performed contentment, because that is what useful people do. They manage other people's worry so nobody looks closer. I am becoming someone, I said. I am not certain who yet, but it is mine. He nodded slowly. I kept the ring for 6 weeks, he said. Then I left it at the women's shelter on 3rd Street. Figured someone should get something real out of it. I did not cry. The version of me that would have cried in a lumberyard, the one who measured her worth by how much she could absorb, was quieter now. Not gone, but smaller. That was the right call. Yeah, he almost smiled. Take care of yourself, Nora. I am working on it. I watched him walk to the register, paid for my screws, drove home with the windows down. He had asked if I was okay. For the first time in a year, I had not had to pretend. And I had not had to explain that being okay for me no longer looked like being necessary to someone. It looked like being accurate about myself, about the ground, about the man waiting, on a porch with a compass and a patience that matched my own. The county recorder's office in Douglas was one room in the back of the county building, staffed by a woman named Greta who had been filing land documents since 1991 and who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and looked at you over them when you asked a question she found interesting. Robert and I arrived at 9 in the morning. I pushed his chair through a door that cleared the wheels by 4 inches. We need to trace the chain of title for Section 9, Township 19 North, Range 68 West, I said. Specifically the mineral estate. Greta adjusted her glasses. Most people just ask about the surface. We are not most people. It took 90 minutes. Greta pulled the original patent, 3 subsequent surface conveyances, and then the document that changed the shape of everything. A separate instrument recorded in 1991 in which Harold Winston Whitfield, Cole's grandfather, conveyed the mineral estate of Section 9 directly to his grandson, Cole James Whitfield, bypassing the family trust entirely. The language was exact. Mineral estate, separate conveyance, all rights to subsurface minerals, ores, and associated substances held in fee simple unto the named grantee and his heirs. Cole stared at the certified copy. My grandfather did this himself, personally, not the trust, not Warren. You, Garrett, does not know. Warren cannot know, because this was recorded separately from every other instrument. It is a split estate. The surface belongs to the trust. The mineral rights belong to you. They have always belonged to you. Greta stamped the copy and slid it across the counter. Anything else? Cole folded the document and placed it inside his jacket, close to his chest. We drove home without speaking. The road was straight and wide. The fields on both sides looked exactly as they always had. Patient, flat, keeping a secret that had been sitting in a courthouse drawer for 34 years. Nobody had thought to look until now. Warren came to the property 3 times that week. Monday. He brought revised trust documents, a thicker stack than before, post-it flags on every signature line. This version is cleaner than the last, he said, consolidates everything properly. Cole did not pick them up. Wednesday. Warren brought his attorney, a man named Dale Hoskins, who sat in the kitchen and explained the benefits of unified asset management in the tone people use when they have decided the person they are talking to cannot follow complicated sentences, reduced liability, simplified filing, streamlined decision-making. It is genuinely in your best interest, Cole. Cole asked one question. Does this include mineral rights? Hoskins hesitated, looked at Warren. Warren's jaw tightened. It includes all rights associated with the property. That is standard language. Cole said nothing else. Hoskins packed his briefcase, left. Friday. Warren came alone. He stood in the living room and made his case the way he always made it. Louder and closer and more certain with each repetition. I have managed this family since Dad died. Since your accident. I kept the accounts. I paid the taxes. I held everything together while you sat in this house, reading old maps. Cole met his eyes. I never asked you to take over. Somebody had to. Warren leaned on the back of a chair. Cole does not get a vote. That is how it has always been, because Cole cannot see what is at stake. Same words, same delivery. And this time I watched something settle behind Cole's expression. Not anger, a decision. Small, private, invisible to anyone who was not looking. Warren scheduled a meeting for the following Saturday. Both families, signing ceremony, official. He left without waiting for a response. The screen door slapped shut behind him. Cole looked at me across the kitchen table. Saturday. Saturday, I said. Dr. Miriam Holt called on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee. Nora, sit down. I sat. I ran the sample 4 times. Full ICP-MS analysis. Your clay returned lithium concentrations of 940 parts per million. I gripped the phone. The DOE threshold for commercial viability was 400. 940 was more than double. That is not a trace reading, Nora. That is a commercial-grade claystone. If the formation is as persistent as the field documentation you sent me suggests, and the stratigraphic position supports it, you are looking at a deposit of significant scale. How significant? I cannot project tonnage from one sample, but a persistent claystone at 38 feet across, even a fraction of a 180-acre section. She paused. You would be looking at a lithium resource that would draw serious interest from every battery-grade developer in the country. I looked at the gray clay jar on the kitchen windowsill. Cole's grandfather had pulled that sample from the ground 28 years ago. He had labeled it in block letters, stored it in a cedar box, told his family the ground held more than anyone was looking for, and nobody had listened. Miriam, I need the formal assay report with full lab certification. You will have it by Friday. I hung up, walked to the study. Cole was at the drafting table with his grandfather's notebook open. 940, I said. He closed his eyes. Not in shock, in something quieter. The expression of a man hearing confirmation of something he had believed without proof for a long time. He knew, Cole said. He always knew. The jar of gray clay sat on the windowsill catching the morning light, a lump of earth in a glass container that anyone would have discarded without a second thought. And underneath it, underneath all of it, a fortune that had been patient for 28 years, waiting for someone who knew how to read the dirt. Robert and I talked until 1 in the morning. The assay report would arrive Friday. The family meeting was Saturday. We had 72 hours. We could walk in and ambush them, I said. Show them the assay and the deed and watch everything collapse. Cole shook his head. That is what Warren would do. 5 words, barely above a whisper. And that sentence became the operating principle for everything that followed. We would not manipulate. We would not perform. We would not engineer a scene for the satisfaction of watching them scramble. We would walk into that room with documents that spoke for themselves. State the facts and leave. The plan, first, retain independent legal counsel in Douglas. An attorney with no connection to Warren or Hoskins who could verify the deed. Confirm the split estate. And send a formal letter establishing Cole's sole ownership of the mineral rights. That letter would arrive at Warren's address the morning of the meeting. Second, file a notice of mineral claim with the county recorder. Public record. Irrevocable. Third, contact the minerals acquisition firm that had called the house. Not to negotiate, just to establish that the mineral owner was aware and engaged. No performance, no revenge. Just paperwork and patience, and 2 people who had learned in very different ways that being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you remain quiet forever. I looked at Cole across the kitchen table. The man in the wheelchair, the man my mother had priced at $450,000. The man whose brother had declared for 4 years that he did not get a vote. Are you ready for Saturday? He picked up the brass compass, turned it once in his palm. Set it down. I have been ready for 3 years. Ruth called Thursday evening. I heard something, she said. I braced. My mother had maintained a network of second-hand information her entire life. Neighbors, hairdressers, distant cousins who talked freely. Someone mentioned a mining company looking at land near Douglas. Is that true? Where did you hear that? Does it matter, Nora? If that land is worth something, her voice shifted to the warm register she used when she wanted something. If that land is worth something, your father and I have a right to know. We made this possible. We brought you into this family. You sold me into this family, Mom. A pause. After everything we did for you, you would cut your own mother out. I could hear Earl in the background. A soft sound. Then his voice, muffled. Leave it alone, Ruth. Quiet. Earl. He went silent. Earl Callahan had responded to conflict the same way his entire life. By disappearing into it, he stood in the current and let it carry him. I had been furious at him for that for most of my life. Now I just felt the weight of it. We will be at the meeting Saturday, Ruth said. Warren invited us, I know. We need to discuss our share. There is no share, Mom. She hung up. I put the phone on the counter. 2 families, 2 agendas, converging on a living room in Converse County in 48 hours. Ruth wanted money. Warren wanted control. Cole wanted his name back. And I wanted something I had never let myself want before. The right to stop being someone else's answer. Friday evening. The assay report arrived by email at 4:12. I printed 2 copies on the inkjet in the study. The attorney's letter had gone out that morning by certified mail. It would reach Warren's address by 10 Saturday. The mineral claim was filed. County recorder stamped, public. Anyone could look it up. I spread everything on the kitchen table. The certified deed copy from Greta at the recorder's office. The assay report from Dr. Holt. The attorney's letter confirming Cole's sole ownership of the mineral estate. The notice of filed claim. 4 documents. Each one a fact. No opinions. No accusations. No dramatic construction. Just the record. Cole wheeled to the table and picked up the deed. My grandfather signed this when I was 6 years old. He knew what he was doing. He knew Warren even then. I placed the gray clay jar next to the documents. A reminder, the thing everyone had dismissed, sitting next to the proof of what it was worth. Tomorrow, Cole said. He looked at the documents, then at me. I will say no. You are certain. I have been saying yes to Warren for 3 years because it felt easier than fighting from this chair. He straightened. I'm finished being easy. I placed everything into a leather portfolio, the same kind Ruth had brought to my kitchen table 14 months ago. The one with the photographs and the typed letter and the promise of $450,000. A different folder now, a different truth inside it. Saturday noon, the Whitfield living room. Warren had arranged the furniture like a proceeding, chairs in a semicircle. His attorney Dale Hoskins at a side table with documents and 2 pens. Warren at the center, standing. Warren always stood when he wanted to feel the height of the room. The Whitfield cousins on one side, Brenda, Warren's wife, quiet near the window, and across from Cole and me, Ruth and Earl Callahan, who had driven 4 hours and arrived 20 minutes early because Ruth always arrived early when she believed money was close. Cole and I entered last. I pushed his chair through the front door and positioned him at the end of the semicircle facing Warren. The leather portfolio sat on my lap. Glad everyone could make it, Warren said. This will not take long. He picked up the trust documents from Hoskins's table and walked them to Cole. A pen placed on top. Post-it flags on every signature line. We have been over this. The consolidation formalizes the unified management of the Whitfield property, including all surface and subsurface rights under the existing family trust. He placed the stack on Cole's armrest. The pen rolled and settled against Cole's hand. Sign where I marked. The room went quiet. Ruth leaned forward. Earl looked at the floor. Hoskins opened his copy. I held the portfolio flat against my thighs. Steady. Cole looked at the documents, then at the pen, then at Warren. The whole room waited for the sound of a signature. Cole picked up the pen. Warren exhaled. Hoskins uncapped his copy. Ruth's fingers moved on the arm of her chair. Cole turned the pen once in his hand. Then he set it down on the armrest next to the unsigned documents. No, Warren blinked. I will not be signing this. Robert, you agreed. Cole's voice was level, the calmest sound in the room. You have told me I do not get a vote at my own kitchen table. In front of your attorney, in front of my wife. He placed both hands flat on the armrests. I vote no, 3 words. And the room cracked in the way rooms crack when something that has been held under pressure for a long time is finally released. Garrett. Warren's face moved through several expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, irritation, calculation, and beneath that, something harder. The first appearance of fear. This is not a vote. This is a legal consolidation. Dale, explain. He understands. Warren. That was me. My voice was calm in the same way I am calm when I present findings to a skeptical review board. Detached, factual, unhurried. Cole understands exactly what you are asking him to sign. He also understands what he owns. Every head turned. Ruth's eyes locked on the portfolio. Earl stopped looking at the floor. Hoskins leaned forward. I opened the portfolio. I placed the first document on the table in front of Warren. This is a certified copy of a deed recorded in 1991 at the Converse County Recorder's Office. It conveys the mineral estate of Section 9 directly to Cole James Whitfield in fee simple. It bypasses the family trust entirely. It has been public record for 34 years. Warren did not move. His eyes went to the document, then to Cole, then to me. What is that? I placed the second document next to the first. This is a certified laboratory assay report from Dr. Miriam Holt at the University of Wyoming Geochemistry Lab. The clay sample collected by Cole's grandfather from 38 feet below Section 9 returned lithium concentrations of 940 parts per million. The DOE threshold for commercial viability is 400, then the third. This is a letter from Cole's independent legal counsel confirming his sole ownership of the mineral estate. The family trust holds the surface rights. The mineral rights have never been part of the trust. They belong to Cole and the fourth. This is a notice of mineral claim filed with the county recorder as of yesterday. Public record. Irrevocable. I set the gray clay jar on the table next to the 4 documents. A glass jar with masking tape and block letters, 28 years old, worth more than every asset Warren had spent 3 years consolidating. The room was so quiet I could hear someone's watch. Warren stared at the documents. His face had gone the color of the fieldstone fireplace behind him. When he spoke, his voice had lost every performance it had ever contained. You cannot just... That deed is from 1991. Recorded deeds do not expire, Warren. Ruth stood up. Her chair scraped the floor. Nora, honey. The warm voice. The reaching hands. We are family. After everything we gave up, you said I was always going to pay you back. I kept my voice exactly where it was. Level. Factual. The same register I had used for the documents. I just did. With the truth. Ruth's mouth opened. Closed. Earl sat with his head down, his hands in his lap. He did not look up. Hoskins quietly closed his briefcase. He turned to Warren. The conveyance is valid. The mineral estate was never included in the trust. Warren's palm came down on the table. The gray clay jar jumped but did not fall. I have managed this family since Dad died. Since the accident. I kept everything running while you sat in this house reading maps. Nobody answered him. Warren paced. His hands opened and closed. I will challenge this. I will hire someone. That deed. There is no way Grandfather would have... Cole's voice cut through. He did it when I was 6 years old. Because he knew you. Warren. And it was recorded at the county courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon in 1991 in front of a notary and a county clerk. I kept my voice exactly where it had been. You can retain anyone you want. They will find the same document Greta pulled for us last week. Warren turned to Hoskins. Dale, I cannot advise you to contest a recorded instrument with a clear chain of title. Warren, I am supposed to be on my side. You are supposed to give you accurate counsel, and my counsel is that the mineral estate belongs to Cole. Warren's face rearranged itself into something I had not seen before. Not anger now, something that lives underneath anger when the ground finally gives out. Ruth tried another approach. She crossed the room and sat close enough that I could smell her perfume. The same kind she had worn my entire childhood. Soft and synthetic and utterly familiar. Baby, think about what we could do together, all of us, as a family. We were never a family, Mom. I said it quietly. We were a transaction. She pulled back. Her eyes went wet. Not from grief, from the frustration of a woman who has always gotten what she needed through tears and is finding for the first time that they are not working. Earl spoke. The first words he had said in the entire room. I should have stopped this. Everyone looked at him. He sat with his shoulders curved, staring at his hands, a man who had stood in currents his entire life. And for one moment, just one, I saw something real in his face. Not apology, not redemption, just the weight of every time he had chosen silence when something else was needed. I did not forgive him, but I saw him. Yeah, I said. You should have. Cole folded the documents and placed them back in the portfolio. He set the gray clay jar on top and screwed the lid tight. We are finished here. Warren stepped forward. You cannot just... Everything is on the record, Warren. The claim is filed. My counsel has the file. If you want to talk, you talk to my attorney. Cole's voice had not changed register once. I moved behind his chair, took the handles, pushed him toward the door. Ruth stood one more time. Nora, do not walk out on your own mother. I stopped, turned, looked at her. The careful lipstick, the pressed collar, the eyes that had been appraising me since before I understood what appraisal meant. I'm not walking out on you, Mom. I am walking away from a price tag you put on me before I was old enough to know what I was worth. She did not follow. Earl stayed in his chair. Warren stood in the center of the room with his hands at his sides. The unsigned trust document on the table, the pen still uncapped. I pushed Cole through the front door and across the plywood ramp and down the gravel driveway. The wheels crunched on the stone. The sky over Wyoming was wide and hard and completely indifferent to what had just happened inside that house. Behind us, someone was talking. Warren, probably. The words dissolved in the distance. Cole reached back and touched my hand on the chair handle. "Nobody gets to decide that anymore," he said quietly. "We answer for ourselves now." I held his hand once, then kept walking. We loaded into the truck, the leather portfolio between us, the gray clay jar on top, warm from the living room. We drove home without speaking. The road was flat and straight. The sky was enormous. And for the first time in my life, the silence around me was not something I had been left in. It was something I had earned. The aftermath arrived in stages, and I want to be precise about each one. Warren retained new counsel the following week. His attorney reviewed the chain of title, confirmed the deed was valid, billed Warren $8,000 for the assessment. The family trust retained the surface estate. The mineral rights stayed with Cole. Cole and I spent 6 weeks interviewing mineral development firms. We chose one with a verified environmental record and a willingness to structure the lease around land preservation and groundwater monitoring. The royalty terms were the kind that make accountants sit up straight. We used the first distribution to establish the Whitfield-Callahan Foundation, a small fund supporting disabled adults in rural Wyoming counties in reclaiming financial and legal autonomy, and subsidizing home health aid wages in counties where people like Anna do critical work for pay that does not come close to matching it. Ruth and Earl. I returned the remaining portion of the $450,000, a wire transfer, a one-line memo, final payment, no further obligations. Then I set a boundary, not a wall, a boundary. I would take their calls on the first Sunday of the month. I would not take their guilt. Ruth called twice before she understood I meant it. Earl has not called. I expect that will continue. Warren lost his standing in the family, the way people lose standing when they have been built on control of something that no longer belongs to them. The cousins stopped deferring. The neighbors started asking questions. Cole's grandfather's brass compass sits on the windowsill of the foundation office now, next to a core drill bit and a framed photograph of Harold Winston Whitfield standing in a field with his boots muddy and a jar of gray clay in his right hand. Some people spend their whole careers reading the ground and find nothing. Harold found everything. He just did not live long enough to be believed. Cole and I never held a second ceremony, never staged a formal acknowledgement of what had grown between us to replace the 9-minute transaction on a plywood ramp. We did not need one. What developed between us was not the kind of love that announces itself. It was slower, built across 12 months of shared meals and shared silence, of two people who had both learned to read what was underneath things, because they had spent their lives being the thing underneath. He made me laugh. I made him visible. He gave me patience. I gave him proof that the world his grandfather had seen in the ground was real and had always been real, and had simply been waiting for someone with the right tools and the right patience to confirm it. We were partners before we were anything else, and the partnership held because it was built on the only thing either of us had ever fully trusted: the data, the record, the truth. On our second anniversary, Cole handed me the brass compass. "Keep it," I said. "It belongs to you." He shook his head. "It was always meant for whoever finished the work." I held it in my palm. The brass was warm. The needle pointed north. 2 years before, I had stood at the end of a gravel driveway and married a stranger because my mother had decided it was time for me to pay her back. Now I stood on a porch I had earned the right to call home, holding the compass of a man whose grandfather had believed in this ground when everyone around him had called it a hobby. Nobody gets to set your price, and the people who try have usually never been able to read what you are actually worth. That is my story. A leather folder, a jar of gray dirt, a compass that pointed north when everything else was trying to point me somewhere smaller, and one quiet no that changed the direction of everything. If someone has ever tried to make you the family's debt, take this as your sign. You are not for sale. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.